He immediately approached a black family seated near the middle of the establishment and demanded their departure, issuing a warning that failure to comply could lead to their apprehension. He informed them they were unsettling patrons as he fixed his gaze upon Darius Thompson, his voice piercing the low murmur of holiday chatter. What Whitman was unaware of was that Darius, aged 38, was a seasoned civil rights advocate with an unblemished professional history and decades of courtroom triumphs, and that a single misstep this evening could precipitate a career-ending catastrophe for the officer. Within a matter of weeks, this confrontation would instigate litigation so significant it would expose ingrained prejudice, compel the police department to account for its transgressions, and ultimately cost the municipality $11 million. Before we proceed further, kindly indicate your geographical location in the comments section where you are viewing this, and ensure you subscribe, as tomorrow's narrative is one you will not want to miss. Darius, attired in a dark wool coat and scarf against the December chill, had meticulously planned this Christmas Eve dinner for weeks. He and his wife Simone entered, bearing gifts for their 2 young children, both brimming with excitement at the festive decorations and the anticipation of delectable holiday treats. The aroma of roasted turkey and freshly baked pies permeated the air, intermingling with the subtle fragrance of peppermint from the holiday garlands adorning the walls. Darius led his family towards a booth situated near the window, allowing the children to point out the twinkling lights outside while he surveyed the room. The diner was predominantly occupied by white patrons, many of whom lifted their eyes from their plates as the family entered. Darius observed the discreet glances, the barely concealed whispers, but he chose to disregard them, concentrating on creating a semblance of normalcy for his children's evening. Whitman's attention was fixed on the family from the moment they entered. He had patrolled this district for years and had cultivated a reputation among his colleagues for his confrontational approach, particularly when responding to calls concerning suspicious individuals who did not align with his perception of who belonged in specific locales. Tonight, propelled by the emergency call, he approached Darius and his family with the assurance of someone who believed his authority alone was sufficient to elicit obedience. His prior conduct suggested a propensity for rapid escalation if challenged, and his narrow preconceptions were already shaping his interpretation of the scene, even before uttering a single word. "Ah, pardon me, you will need to leave," Whitman stated sharply, his hand resting near his belt as if poised for a confrontation. Darius looked up calmly, adjusting his scarf. "Officer, we are merely here for dinner. It is Christmas Eve, and we have our children with us. We have done nothing improper." Whitman waved him away without a second glance. "I do not concern myself with that. Someone contacted emergency services. You are causing discomfort to others. Proceed outside immediately." The atmosphere in the room grew heavy. Patrons shifted their gazes between the officer and the family. Some whispered amongst themselves, others feigned unawareness, and the waitstaff averted their eyes completely. Simone, Darius's wife, gently placed a hand on his arm, murmuring, "It's all right, just remain composed." However, the injustice of the situation was immediate and undeniable. Darius could discern the bewilderment in his children's eyes, the manner in which their excitement had been supplanted by uncertainty. He could hear the low murmurs of other diners, the subtle transformation of the atmosphere from a cheerful holiday evening to one tinged with apprehension. Whitman's stance, his tone, and his dismissal of any explanation underscored the inequity of the entire encounter. The officer was not reacting to facts. He was reacting to assumptions and his own biases, leveraging his authority to intimidate a family that had committed no offense. Therefore, as Darius carefully guided his children toward the exit, endeavoring to shield them from the intensifying tension, he noted the subtle details that rendered the situation even more surreal. A waitress discreetly recorded the interaction on her mobile device, likely anticipating an altercation. A few customers conversed amongst themselves, some expressing empathy, others maintaining silence, unwilling to challenge authority publicly. The festive Christmas lights overhead twinkled innocently, starkly contrasting with the burgeoning sense of menace that Whitman's presence engendered. Every step the family took towards the door felt like a struggle for their dignity, not because they had committed any transgression, but because an individual in a position of power deemed them unwelcome. Whitman followed closely behind them, his tone never softening. "Move along more quickly. Do not compel me to place you under arrest." Darius maintained a steady vocal cadence as he reiterated that their sole intention was to enjoy a holiday meal. But the officer completely disregarded his words. The unfairness of the moment was starkly apparent. White diners continued their meals peacefully, their tables filled with laughter and conversation, while Darius's family was being treated as offenders for occupying the same space. In that instant it became unequivocally clear that authority, when exercised without accountability, could be weaponized in the most personal and humiliating ways imaginable. By the time they stepped out into the crisp December air, the family's initial joy had been replaced by disbelief and hurt. Darius's mind raced, not with anger towards his children, who required reassurance, but with a profound awareness of the larger implications. This was not merely a personal indignity. It was tangible evidence of a system that permitted officers like Whitman to act with impunity. What had begun as a simple dinner excursion had evolved into the commencement of a confrontation that would extend far beyond the confines of the diner. By the conclusion of this evening, the initial embers of a legal battle that would expose discrimination, demand accountability, and seek justice for a family merely striving to celebrate Christmas had already been ignited. Whitman did not step aside. Instead, he advanced, constricting the available space and reiterating his command with deliberate slowness, as if prolonging the utterance would ensure compliance. "I instructed you to halt right there." His tone was devoid of emotion, strictly official, already framing the interaction as defiance rather than confusion. The family paused not by volition, but because the officer had positioned himself to render any movement impossible. A body-worn camera captured the pause, along with the ensuing silence which persisted long enough to register the pressure being exerted. Darius tightened his grip slightly on his child's hand and spoke with an even tone. "Officer, we are complying. We are departing." There was no edge to his voice, no indication of panic. The very calmness seemed to irk Whitman. The officer leaned in, reducing the distance without physical contact, asserting dominance through his proximity. "You do not make that determination," Whitman retorted. "I do." His voice elevated just enough to be clearly audible to those in the vicinity. The power imbalance was unmistakable. Whitman spoke in directives intended to terminate discussion. Darius responded with measured sentences designed to prevent the situation from deteriorating. Whitman shifted his body once more, angling himself so that the children were compelled to stand alongside their parents. He raised his hand slightly, not as a threat, but as a gesture of control. "Remain precisely where you are," he stated. "Do not move." A mobile phone was raised nearby. Another followed suit. Someone murmured, "This is being recorded." Whitman's eyes flickered towards the movement, then snapped back to Darius, and his jaw tightened. "I told you not to move," he repeated, his voice louder now. The repetition was not directed at the family. It was for the increasingly large audience. Darius nodded once, slowly, as if acknowledging an instruction in a formal setting. He did not argue. He did not resist. He inquired calmly, "Are we being detained?" The question was procedural, not confrontational. The subsequent pause was brief but noticeable. Whitman responded, "You are being uncooperative. You are causing a disturbance." His wording sounded rehearsed, drawn from habit rather than observation. No one in the vicinity reacted as if a disturbance were occurring. Conversations had ceased. All attention had narrowed to the exchange itself. A staff member stood motionless, hands clasped, eyes fixed on the officer. Another whispered, barely audibly, "This should not be happening." A response came quickly, even quieter. It always commences this way. Whitman reached for his radio. "I require an additional unit," he announced, his voice clipped and official. Potential refusal to comply. He released the button and turned back towards the family. "This is your final admonition," he stated. "Step away now, or you will be detained." The onus for any escalation was placed squarely upon them. Darius exhaled slowly and turned slightly towards his wife. "Stay close," he said quietly. The words were calm, deliberate. The manner in which he spoke suggested experience with high-pressure circumstances, with the careful selection of words when every sentence might be scrutinized later. That particular detail did not go unnoticed. Someone nearby whispered, "He is calmer than the officer." Whitman's posture stiffened. "I am addressing you," he snapped. Not the assembled onlookers, he gestured briefly, then caught himself and lowered his hand. The body camera documented the motion. It also captured the shift in his tone, which was now sharper, less controlled. "Do you believe you are more intelligent than this situation?" he asked. "You are not in command here." More mobile phones appeared. Someone took a step back to widen their photographic frame. A quiet voice remarked, "Make certain you capture his badge number." Whitman heard it. His gaze shifted again, faster this time. "Recording does not alter the law," he stated, "and it does not alter what transpires next." Darius responded immediately. "Then apply it correctly." The sentence was concise, controlled, and factual. It landed with more impact than any heated argument. Whitman hesitated for only a fraction of a second, but it was enough. He masked it by raising his voice. "Cease speaking." From behind them someone whispered, "He detests it when individuals do not panic." Another replied, "Yes, this is how complaints originate." Whitman turned sharply towards the source of the sound. "Who made that statement?" No one responded. The ensuing silence felt intentional. Whitman turned back and adjusted his stance once more, positioning himself closer than necessary. "You are obstructing an investigation," he declared. "That constitutes obstruction." The word sounded familiar, as if previously employed. Darius listened without interruption, nodding slightly, as if cataloguing each accusation. Nearby, a worker leaned towards a colleague and whispered, "This is the same officer from before." The colleague did not reply, merely pressed their lips together and looked away. Whitman did not hear the words, but he sensed the shift. The confidence he had carried into the encounter no longer permeated the room. Whitman pressed his radio again. "Status." A brief crackle was the response. He lowered the device slowly. His gaze drifted back to the mobile phones, lingering now. "You are making this more complex than it needs to be," he stated, his voice softer than before. Darius met his eyes. His expression remained composed. "We did not create this situation," he replied. The statement was neutral, factual. It reframed the present moment. Whitman opened his mouth to respond, then stopped. His eyes caught something specific. A screen, a name being entered, the sound of a notification. His shoulders tensed. He straightened slightly as if suddenly aware of his posture, his tone, and the optics of the situation. For a moment no one spoke. Whitman took one step backward, a small, controlled, unmistakable movement. That was the instant the officer realized this situation was no longer under his dominion. Whitman's foot settled back onto the floor, and then nothing further transpired. No command was issued. No threat was made. The body camera continued its recording, capturing a silence that extended longer than any order he had previously given. His eyes remained fixed forward, but the certainty that had been behind them had vanished. The witnesses immediately perceived it. Mobile phones ceased their movement. Whispers faded. The pause itself became the defining moment. Darius did not speak. He did not adjust his posture or step forward. He waited. The stillness compelled Whitman to fill the void, and for the first time since his arrival, the officer hesitated before opening his mouth. His radio crackled again, a brief update from another unit. Whitman acknowledged it with a concise response, then slowly lowered the device as if to buy himself time. "Sir," Whitman stated, the word emerging softer than before, "I need to confirm some information." It was not a command. It was not even an accusation. It was a procedural redirection, and everyone present recognized the difference. Darius calmly reached into his coat and produced a slim leather wallet. He did not raise it high. He did not announce anything. He simply held it out at chest level, steady and open. Within it were his credentials, impeccably official. Whitman leaned forward just enough to read them. His expression shifted. Not dramatically, not visibly at first, merely a tightening around his eyes and a blink. A second look. The body camera captured the moment his confidence began to recalibrate. He straightened, then shifted his weight again, this time unconsciously creating space between himself and the family. "That is," Whitman began, then stopped. He cleared his throat. One moment. A second officer stepped closer, glancing at the credentials, then back at Whitman. "Those are valid," they stated quietly. The confirmation was brief, professional, and definitive. A voice from nearby murmured, "I knew something felt off." Another phone tilted slightly, capturing the exchange. Whitman's hands dropped to his sides, his shoulders relaxing, not out of relief, but out of necessity. The authoritative bearing he had exhibited moments earlier no longer suited him. "Mr. Thompson," he said, using the name for the first time. The shift was immediate. Titles superseded assumptions. His tone flattened into formality. "I was unaware." Darius nodded once. He said nothing further. He did not need to. Whitman glanced around, now acutely aware of the number of people observing, the number of devices still recording. His voice lowered. "There appears to have been a misunderstanding," he stated. The words sounded rehearsed but less forceful than before. "You are free to depart." The second officer stepped slightly to the side, creating a clear path where moments before none had existed. A staff member exhaled audibly. Someone whispered, "Wow!" Another voice, quieter, said, "That changed rapidly." Whitman avoided eye contact as he adjusted his radio again. "Disregard," he stated into it. "No detention." The phrasing was clipped, efficient. The earlier threats had vanished, replaced by procedure. He turned back to Darius. "You may continue on your way." Darius looked down at his children. Then back up. "We will," he said calmly. There was no triumph in his voice, no edge, merely closure. Whitman nodded stiffly. "I apologize for the inconvenience." The word inconvenience hung in the air, inadequate and exposed. He swallowed and added, "Enjoy the remainder of your evening." The sentence felt forced, but it was spoken. The witnesses reacted in fragments. A nod here, a quiet curse there. Someone lowered their phone, shaking their head. Another continued recording, ensuring the conclusion mirrored the beginning. The shift was undeniable. What had been an assertion of authority minutes earlier now resembled a retreat. Whitman stepped back again, this time deliberately. His movements were careful now, measured. He avoided obstructing anyone. He avoided raising his voice. The power had transferred, and he was aware of it. The realization manifested not in his words, but in his restraint. Darius guided his family forward without haste. He did not rush. He did not linger. His composure remained unchanged from the outset, and that consistency did more damage than any argument could have. As they passed, the second officer observed quietly, his expression neutral but respectful. Behind them, Whitman stood motionless, his eyes tracking the space they had occupied moments prior. The weight of what had nearly occurred settled upon him. The body camera continued to record. So did the mobile phones. The record was complete. A staff member whispered to another, "This is going to be reviewed." The reply came immediately. "It already is," someone else added. He pushed too far this time. Whitman heard none of it, but his posture suggested he understood nonetheless. Darius paused briefly, turning just enough to address Whitman once more. "For the record," he stated calmly, "we did nothing wrong. It was not a challenge. It was a statement." Whitman nodded once, his lips pressed together. "Yes, sir," he replied. That was the moment the reality began to sink in. Not just for Whitman, but for everyone observing. This was not over. It had merely altered its trajectory. By that afternoon, the footage had been flagged. The incident report was forwarded before it could be softened. Internal Affairs was notified before the body camera ceased recording. The review process commenced the same afternoon. A formal incident report was logged, time-stamped, and transmitted through the department's chain of command. Body camera footage from multiple vantage points was secured, along with publicly recorded videos submitted by witnesses. Supervisors were informed before the end of their shift. According to policy, the encounter was classified as a review of the use of authority, triggering an internal assessment independent of the responding officer's unit. Within 48 hours, the footage was reviewed by command staff. The sequence of events was reconstructed frame by frame. Audio was transcribed. Commands were compared against departmental guidelines pertaining to detentions, citizen removals, and disorderly conduct. Statements were solicited from restaurant employees, bystanders, and the secondary officer who arrived after the escalation had already commenced. The process moved deliberately without commentary or speculation, adhering to procedure rather than succumbing to public pressure. Internal Affairs initiated a formal investigation. Their mandate was specific and narrowly defined, to determine whether authority had been misused and whether departmental policy had been violated. The review referenced prior complaints involving similar conduct, not as conclusive judgments but as contextual information. Each action taken that evening was measured against training manuals, departmental standards, and constitutional requirements. The incident was no longer solely about a single officer or a single family. It had entered the institutional record. Officer Bradford Whitman was placed on administrative leave pending the outcome of the investigation. His badge and service weapon were surrendered in accordance with protocol. He was reassigned away from public-facing duties while the review proceeded. The department issued a brief statement confirming that an internal review was underway and that no further commentary would be provided until the findings were finalized. The language employed was neutral. The action taken was not. As the investigation progressed, additional information came to light. The timeline expanded. Prior supervisory notes were examined. Training evaluations were reviewed. The pattern that emerged did not rely on interpretation. It relied on documentation. By the time the internal findings were concluded, the department determined that Whitman had exceeded his authority, failed to de-escalate the situation, and acted without sufficient legal justification. The consequences followed departmental procedure, not public sentiment. Whitman's authority was revoked. His assignment concluded. His record was permanently amended to reflect the violation. Civil proceedings commenced shortly thereafter. Legal counsel representing the family filed a federal civil rights lawsuit citing unlawful removal, abuse of authority, and emotional distress. The filing referenced the recorded footage, witness statements, and the internal findings already on record. Efforts to address the situation commenced, initially through formal requests and subsequently via dialogue. Over a span of several months, sworn testimonies were collected. The collected information consistently pointed to the same facts. Ultimately, the municipality opted for an amicable resolution. The final sum agreed upon for the settlement was $11 million. This amount received endorsement through the established governmental procedures and was officially recorded. The accord encompassed modifications to existing rules, mandates for enhanced officer instruction, and an admission of impropriety without accepting personal culpability. While this conclusion formally concluded the legal proceedings, its ramifications within the organization reverberated more broadly. Throughout this entire period, Darius Thompson largely stayed away from public attention. He offered no public pronouncements during the inquiry. He did not attend any public gatherings. When approached for commentary via his spokespeople, his replies were concise and carefully considered. He conveyed that the issue was never about retribution. Instead, it was about responsibility and ensuring such events would not recur. His conduct consistently mirrored the self-control he had exhibited from the outset. The public's reaction was swift, yet subdued. Local news outlets disseminated the outcome based on confirmed documentation rather than conjecture. Advocacy organizations cited the case in conversations concerning policing standards and supervision. The department released a revised directive that underscored lawful apprehensions, awareness of prejudice, and the obligation to diffuse volatile situations. Training schedules were adjusted, and protocols for supervisory review were strengthened. The event became a component of organizational education rather than a public spectacle. What endured most prominently were the official documents, the visual recordings, the investigative findings, and the final judgment. An ordinary evening had resulted in a permanent record. A single judgment call had transitioned from a moment of conferred power to an issue of public accountability. No grand pronouncements were made. No triumph was declared. The system had articulated its findings through its own established processes. The concluding internal report concluded with a solitary sentence taken directly from departmental guidelines. Officers are empowered to safeguard the public, not to instill fear in them. The case was officially closed. The file was placed in the archives. The record persisted. Should you believe that accountability ought to extend to all individuals, irrespective of their position, please ensure you subscribe for similar narratives.